Hello and welcome to the Sustainable Materials Management webinar series, a joint effort between the National Recycling Coalition and the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center. My name is Wayne Bowen. I'm the program manager for the Recycling Market Center and will serve as your moderator today. Today's topic is how and when to apply for federal funding. We have an ensemble cast of 7 presenters today, and we will introduce them before each of their respective presentations. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge the Institute of Local Self-Reliance and Zero Waste USA as additional sponsors of the webinar. And I want to make a special thanks to Gary List for providing the webinar content and securing all the presenters today. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentations. If you have a question or comment, use the Q&A feature on your control panel on your screen. Please note that an edited version of this webinar will be made available for viewing via YouTube links on the National Recycling Coalition and Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center websites. And also please note that the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center, its affiliates and funders, and the National Recycling Coalition, as well as the additional sponsors, assume no liability resulting from the use of any information provided during the webinar. The webinar is only provided as an informational tool and no discrimination is intended and no endorsement by these organizations is implied. And now I'm going to introduce our first presenter. Bob Gedert is president of the National Recycling Coalition. Bob was the lead author of the American Recycling Infrastructure Plan for the Recycling is Infrastructure 2 campaign. Bob also has had a 40-year plus career in guiding communities towards sustainable materials management through a systems approach, bridging recycling best practices and sustainability with local economic development practices. He's currently writing a book on climate change and also teaches a class on this topic at Xavier University in Cincinnati. And I'll hand it over to you, Bob.
Yes, and thank you. Thank you all for attending today. And I simply would like to welcome you. The National Recycling Coalition is a nonprofit organization focused on promoting and enhancing recycling in the United States. Our network of more than 6,000 members extends across waste reduction, reuse, recycling, and composting, and together we are recycling. And today we are providing this partnership of the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center and the National Recycling Coalition. And this webinar is part of the Recycling is Infrastructure 2 campaign as a series. We, as a mission of the National Recycling Coalition, we wish to bring forward this webinar on how and when to apply for federal funding. And we have been buried in this topic in our campaign to bring forward recycling as a part of the infrastructure campaign as Congress is discussing infrastructure. And we are proud to bring forward part of this webinar as part of our campaign. And we begin today. And I bring forward Sashi as our first speaker. Wayne, I bring it back to you.
Okay, Sashi, you can share your screen, please. So Sashi Sagan is a sustainability coordinator for the National Recycling Coalition. She's researching the availability of federal funding for projects listed in the American Recycling Infrastructure Plan that was developed by NRC as part of the Recycling is Infrastructure 2 campaign. She's working to find available federal funding listed in Grants.gov and by contacting different federal agencies. She's also compiling funding that will become available as infrastructure bills are adopted by Congress. All yours, Sashi.
Thank you so much, Wayne, for that kind introduction. Yes, so today I'll be talking about federal funding availability. I'll be doing a quick overview on some tips and tricks. The first thing that I will be going over is navigating grants.gov.com. Then I'll be going over some tips and tricks for grant applications, some resources where you can track when grants come out. I'll be talking a little bit about the funding opportunities available from the U.S. Department of Energy as well as the U.S. EDA. So let's get started. Grants.gov is where federal grants are going through. All the applications go through grants.gov. I highlighted an example of what the website looks like for everyone who is not familiar with it. This is an example of if we search something such as pollution prevention, which is one of the federal grants available at this time related to what we're doing. It's important to know that along this bar, there are some selection tools that you can use. So you can narrow down your searches from forecasted and posted. You should open the eligibility for all and keep it more broad rather than short. It's also important to note that for Grants.gov, a lot of the grants will say that they are open to nonprofits and businesses, but in reality, the ones that are actually applicable for recycling may be limited. So it's important to sift through as many as possible. I had the privilege of talking to Timony Hood from the EPA a little bit on Grants.gov, and she gave me some very helpful advice for grant writing. She said that the guidelines are extremely strict, so you have to be very mindful about submitting your application even a couple of days prior because of either the software crashing on grants.gov or time zone differences, because these are federal grants and all applications are due in Eastern Standard Time. You can be eliminated for careless formatting errors. She advised against leaving any sections blank, even if it was not applicable, because you can at least write an explanation. She encourages letters of support. They're very important. You should focus heavily on the project narrative and highlight any previous grant writing experience that you have. Since there are a very limited number of grants that are accepted, you're still encouraged to apply and ask for feedback. And every region has an EPA grant specialist that you can reach out to for help on your application. These are two grant watching resources. The resource recycling website has a very strong list of grants that is updated regularly. And then there's also one on Grant Watch, which highlights a Grant Watch ID, which you can then Google for more detailed information. The US Department of Energy also has federal funding availability. These are the different departments or types of sectors under the website that are applicable for recycling as infrastructure too. And then this is just an example of how the US Department of Energy has previously invested millions of dollars to combat plastic waste and reduce plastic industry emissions. So again, these are just highlighting the departments within the website that you can navigate to find federal funding availability within the US Department of Energy. And then the other or final department I wanted to highlight was the US EDA. And these are actually the names of the different funding opportunities available, as well as another example of them investing money into, well, it might not be directly recycling, it was related to environmental work. I would like to highlight that for the purposes of this webinar, the area that I would recommend strongly for looking towards grant opportunities would be the statewide planning, research, and networks funding. And again, that will take you directly to grants.gov. So I think I sped through that information very quickly. But I just wanted to give like a slight overview. If you have any questions about any of the material that I presented today, please feel free to contact me at my email address, which is written in the bottom right-hand corner, or the NRC email address, because I'll have access to both. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sashi. And just so you know that at the end of the webinar, we'll put up a slide to have all the contact information for our presenters. So
sounds good.
So, okay, our next presenter is Maya Sjogren. Maya works on advancing sustainable materials management at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. She leads the EPA team that is helping enhance the U.S. recycling system. Prior to joining EPA in 2007, Maya worked in the private sector and academia. She holds finance and urban planning degrees and is dedicated to collaboratively creating a sustainable world.
Thanks for that, Wayne. Give me 1 second while I attempt to reshare. Okay. Okay, great. So Maya Sjogren with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I'm going to highlight our opportunities to support recycling infrastructure and also highlight some unprecedented congressional support on recycling. In this legislative session, we have seen 20 either new or reintroduced legislative proposals related to recycling and food waste reduction. And EPA has already received congressional direction to develop a national recycling strategy, which I'll highlight briefly. We are also collecting data related to single-use plastics and recycling. We're developing a plastic strategy and several reports on plastics due to the Save Our Seas Act, Save Our Seas 2.0 Act. And then, of course, the focus of today, which is we're issuing grants to support recycling in communities. So this is maybe the most important slide, which is our summary slide. We are starting recycling grant programs. In November 2021, we received funds to issue grants to support solid waste infrastructure for recycling. So that's to the tune of $55 million a year for 5 years. And we will also be supporting education and outreach on waste prevention and recycling to the tune of $15 million a year for 5 years. These are brand new grant programs, so we are ramping those up, starting the process. We don't anticipate those RFAs to be issued until much later this year and in 2023. But this web link at the bottom is a great resource for you all to stay connected, to learn about the grants when they are available. So that's epa.gov/recycling strategy/forms/stay-connected. Best resource available for right now to learn more about these when they are available. But I'll give you a preview of what we know so far, which is we have the reduce, reuse, and recycling education and outreach grants. As mentioned, it's $15 million a year for the next 5 years. And the goal is to support education and outreach on recycling and waste prevention. That will allow communities to inform the public on what is accepted in their communities, and ideally to help increase the collection rates and decrease contamination in recycling. The eligible entities for those grants will be state, local, tribal governments, nonprofit organizations, and public-private partnerships. As directed in the legislation, EPA is developing a model recycling program toolkit for communities, and that toolkit will be used for grantees to help shape their application. EPA is starting to collect stakeholder and public input to inform these grants. We will be issuing a request for information through the Federal Register notice. So you can then provide us comments on the grants and what should be in the grants. We are also holding national level stakeholder engagement conversations to help shape those grants as well. And again, these are new grants, including the Solid Waste Infrastructure for Recycling grant. We're calling it our Swiffer grants. And that'll be about $55 million a year for the next 5 years. The goal of that grant is to support improvements to recycling programs, post-consumer materials management, and waste management infrastructure. The eligible entities for that include states, tribes, DC, territories, and political subdivisions. And we are also going to be issuing a opportunity to collect feedback through a request for information through the Federal Register notice, as well as national level engagements to inform these grants. EPA is not issuing grants on battery recycling. The Department of Energy is, and that is also, so you can learn about that from them at some point. But I wanted to give you a preview of what we are doing related to battery collection, thanks to the resources in the bipartisan infrastructure law. We are developing a program to work with states to collect best practices in collecting batteries for recycling. And these best practices will consider the technical and economic feasibility for states, tribes, and local governments, environmentally sound principles. It will consider the safety for waste management workers and how to optimize the value of the materials derived from recycling batteries. We are also creating a labeling guidelines program, and we will work with stakeholders to develop this as well. These are not grants. The purpose is to help improve the battery collection so that they can be we can reduce our battery waste and keep the critical minerals in circulation. The goals are to promote battery collection locations and increase accessibility to these locations, to encourage more battery collection and recycling by consumers, and to reduce safety concerns such as fires in collection trucks and recycling facilities that occur when batteries are not disposed of properly. So we're proud to also highlight the National Recycling Strategy, which was released in November 2021. This is our first strategy in a series on building a circular economy for all. This strategy includes nearly 50 actions from across the value chain to help create a more resilient and effective recycling system. So the actions are not just federal actions, but they include actions for private industry as well as state and local governments as well. So as you are contemplating potentially applying for grants, I encourage you to consult the strategy to see how it may align and how actions that you're proposing may align with some of the challenges in the recycling system. So the scope of the strategy focuses on household or municipal solid waste and how to improve recycling for that. The actions, as mentioned, are for across the value chain for all stakeholders to help create a more equitable and cost-effective and more resilient household recycling system. The strategy acknowledges that recycling is only one part of what is needed to achieve a circular economy. And this strategy also commits EPA to developing additional strategies, including strategies on plastics, food waste and organics, and electronics. The strategy frames the actions around these challenges to the US recycling system. The challenges are that there's inadequate recycling infrastructure and limited market demand for some recyclables. There's a lot of confusion on what is recyclable, and that causes contamination in the recycling stream and makes some bales less usable or unusable. And there are also environmental justice concerns, including on access to recycling facilities and location of facilities. And the actions in the strategy are associated with these 5 objectives. We recognize the need to improve the market value for recycled commodities. If there is no value for the recycled feedstocks, then the recycling system is not economically viable. We need to increase the collection and improve materials management infrastructure. We need to reduce contamination in the recycled materials stream. We need to enhance policies and programs to support circularity. And we need to standardize our measurement and increase data collection so we can better assess our improvement. And we're also quite pleased that the bipartisan infrastructure law funds and the grants that will be funded through those are supporting several of the objectives in the strategy, including to help us decrease contamination in the recycling stream. These funds will help ensure that resources are available for education and outreach. They will help support messaging and educational materials about the importance and value of recycling. They will help communities to develop recycling messages to increase recycling and ensure a more consistent stream of recyclable material. And they will also help identify effective ways to educate the public about the value of recycling. These bipartisan infrastructure law funds will also support improvements to recycling infrastructure by providing public and private funding opportunities. They will help to fund research, development, demonstration, and deployment of new technologies and processes for recycling, and to fund processing efficiencies and material recovery facilities. So here is the probably the most important link from this presentation is, again, the Stay Connected form, where you can sign up to stay connected and learn more about our grant opportunities and our circular economy strategies, as well as other reports. If you'd like to see all of the actions in the strategy, you can consult the strategy at epa.gov/recycling strategy. And if you have questions, I will be signing off sadly at 3 o'clock today, but if you have questions that I don't get to during this session, you're welcome to follow up with us at eparecycles@epa.gov. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Maya. Our next presenter is Michelle Amhaz, and I'm going to be running her slides. So give me a minute here to get her presentation up. Okay, Michelle serves as the program manager for the US EPA, their pollution prevention and source reduction assistance grant programs, including the funding from the Infrastructure Act adopted last year. These programs provide funding opportunities to help businesses and others adopt and implement pollution prevention strategies. Michelle also works closely with regional P2 programs on priority setting and planning. Michelle has over 21 years experience in grant program management and administration. And I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Wayne, and thanks, Gary, for this opportunity. I really do appreciate it. So I understand that a lot of folks might be well versed with P2, but just briefly, before I get into the 2 grant announcements that were released last month, I did want to just touch on addressing how we define pollution prevention, just for those that are unfamiliar with what P2 is. So if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to quickly go through a couple of slides on defining what P2 is. So if we go to the next one. So P2 is about practicing any practice that reduces the amount of hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminants. And this is all practices that are addressed prior to recycling of discarded material, treatment, or disposal. So P2 is also about protecting hazards to public health and the environment. Again, this is all coming from the Pollution Prevention Act of 1990. Next slide. The other elements to mention here, P2 is about the efficient use of water, of energy use, of raw materials, or taking actions to protect natural resources, again, prior to recycling and cleanup. Something that I also would like to add here, that pollution prevention may also involve taking practices to modify equipment. So it's not noted on this slide, but I would like to say that modifying equipment can be used in the manufacturing or the maintenance facility, and this would be a pollution prevention practice. And this is all for the purpose of reducing or eliminating the amount of pollutants that get released into the air, into the water, or onto the land. And so, for example, in that vein, you could think of pollution prevention under the umbrella of sustainability, where we're looking at the upstream activities. So at the beginning of the process of thinking about how you're going to reduce or eliminate the pollutants at the source before it becomes a problem. And if we go to the next slide, I need to sort of balance it with what P2 is, what is not P2, because it gets a little confusing. So if we go to the next slide, P2 is not about altering the physical or the chemical or the biological characteristics of a pollutant, hazardous substance, or contaminant. So in other words, P2 is not about managing pollution. It's not about controlling or monitoring the pollution to keep it at bay. I want to emphasize here, P2 is about proactively thinking of upstream efforts, how and what can be done at the start. So actions can be identified at the source where the problem is to reduce or eliminate the pollutant or waste that could become a problem to the environment or to your community. Next slide. So here is just a visual of our agency P2 hierarchy, and the takeaway here is that pollution prevention or source reduction is the most preferable method. Next slide. So I just wanted to briefly capture P2 benefits. We like to show that, we, in our program, we have a very small program. We issue very small grants. Roughly on average, we issue $100,000 to $130,000 a year grants. These are small grant programs. However, the takeaway is that with these small grants, collectively over an 8-year period, we have managed to make really significant results. And so this slide compiles the cost savings and also the environmental savings that were achieved over an 8-year period from 451 of our pollution prevention grants from various different programs. Next slide. So now I've shown you some of the numbers. What are the actions? So P2 can involve producing less waste. It could mean proposing fewer hazards posed to public health and the environment. P2 is also about helping American businesses. And this gets back to our Pollution Prevention Act, because we want to help American businesses compete economically through these grants. We want to help them to reduce their operating, their regulatory, and their liability costs. We also like to use P2 to spur and leverage and amplify innovation. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see here that the emphasis in our act, we are authorized by the Pollution Prevention Act to provide technical assistance using P2 practices or source reduction to businesses. And businesses can mean small, medium, or large. So if we go to the next slide, now we get into our 2 P2 grant announcements that were released on February the 9th. We have one with recurring RFA funds and one with the bipartisan infrastructure law funds. And I will get into that on the next slide. So if we go to the next slide, before that, I did want to briefly touch on the eligibility. So as you can see here on the eligibility, the grants are offered to various entities. And if you just go to the next slide, Wayne. We do want to encourage eligible applicants to reach out to ineligible entities. So a state government could partner, and we do encourage this, partner with a nonprofit group. They could partner with a for-profit entity. They could partner with a local or city government. We definitely encourage partnerships under these grant opportunities. Next slide. So just going over what we look for when we're reviewing these applications. And I'm just going to stick on the first bullet for a minute. Describing the P2 technical assistance work. This is critical. So in section 1E of both of our RFAs, we do make a note of what folks should look at. And this is addressing the P2 technical assistance approach and how that's carried out. And we did this purposely in this section to define what this means. So you might consider a P2 technical assistance approach by offering P2 best practices on your project and sharing that information with others. And that could involve developing a user's guide. It could involve developing a self-paced video for a business client. It could involve sharing on-site technical assistance with the facility manager. There are a number of different approaches that you could use to carry out pollution prevention work. We're also looking for project work to emphasize one of our national emphasis areas, or as we call them, NEAs. And we also want applicants to lay out comprehensive plans for their reporting results and grant activities and to develop at least one case study. We would also like grant applicants to make sure that they're emphasizing best practices and how they're going to amplify those best practices. So how they're going to share them with others so we can grow P2 practice work nationwide with others. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we released these 2 grant announcements, and just want to note here that we are also emphasizing environmental justice in both of these grant announcements, and we're also emphasizing climate change. The RFAs are identical, except as I'm going to note on the following slide. And applicants are very welcome to submit applications to both RFAs, but in order to be funded under both, the work described in each application and work plan must clearly be separate from or in addition to the work described in the other grant announcement. Next slide. So here I'm showing you a comparison of our 2 RFAs. And so I'm just going to briefly touch on some of these points. If we go through the recurring appropriated RFA first, you'll see there that we have 9.38 million. The cost share, and this is a statutory requirement, the cost share is 50% under this grant announcement. These grants are PPG eligible, which means you could include them in a performance partnership grant agreement. We are going to issue the awards incrementally, and we are approximating that we'll issue around 20 or less, but this is just an estimate. If we take our attention to the bipartisan infrastructure law, RFA, the funding is slightly higher. However, the cost share is 0. We have a 0 match for these grants. We are anticipating awarding more, between 40 to 50 awards. The awards will be fully funded upon issuance. However, these grants are not eligible for inclusion in a PPG agreement because we need to track the BIL funds separately, and we can't commingle the funds with other programmatic funding. So that's why we have to track them separately, and they can't be under a PPG. The last 2 columns emphasize that the applicant pool and the NEAs are the same. So if we jump to the next slide, you'll see here are our 6 NEAs, and the applicants are to address at least one. Addressing more than one will not give an application preference. If we go to the next slide, I'm just sharing here some of our P2 project grant examples. These are actually located in Appendix B of both RFAs. And I just want to note here, it's not on this slide, but you could also think about conducting trainings for a large number of businesses on P2 practices being applied to a specific NEA sector, or demonstrating a new technology that may not be widely known. You could think about assisting a business with reducing or eliminating the manufacture of single-use plastics. You could conduct training and P2 outreach to teach groups of businesses to identify and reduce the use of hazardous chemicals, of water, and energy. So again, these project examples, it's not an exhaustive list by any means, but we wanted to share these with potential applicants just to get a sense of what you could do. So these are located in Appendix B. We also ask that applicants adhere to the performance measures. And so if you're an applicant, please provide a comprehensive plan for how you're going to report on your outputs and outcomes. If you receive a P2 grant award, you will be a grantee, and then you will be expected to follow up with how you are providing that technical assistance to the business. So you want to follow up with the facilities that receive the P2 practice to find out whether they actually adopted it or implemented it. Grantees are also encouraged to use our templates, and we offer those in Appendix E of both RFAs, and this is to address the required reporting. Next slide. So here we have some tips for you. Please start early. Please commit those partners that are engaged in the work. We also look for applicants to provide succinct but clear descriptions of their proposed work. Some applicants are seasoned applicants, and please don't assume, though, if you are a seasoned applicant, that the EPA reviewers will know what you're trying to do. It's very important that you're clear with what you're trying to propose, and don't assume that someone understands it. So providing a clear description. We also lay out how the project narrative should be addressed in the RFAs, and this is all captured in Section 4. So we actually lay out the content. So Section 4 is all about what goes into your project narrative, how to pull together your application. It's all about pulling things together. And then Appendix C is all about the submission process. So submitting your application through Grants.gov, or if you have some other way of, if you have technical difficulties, you could receive a waiver, which is an exception method that could be applied, but you have to get approval for that. We do have an application checklist to help applicants make sure that they're comfortable submitting their application. So this is helpful to make sure you're ready to submit it, and that you've addressed all the points that need to be addressed through the threshold eligibility criteria, and that you addressed all the evaluation criteria. Applications again are due April 11th. Next slide. So here I'm just providing some resources. Again, you can refer to our grants page. We do have a frequently asked questions document. It's fairly comprehensive, 15 pages of frequently asked questions. However, if you don't find your question answered there, then please, you are welcome to contact our P2 Hub helpline. It's actually manned by our contractor, and you could actually call them. You could fill out an online form, or you can send them an email. We do have agency contacts in both RFAs in section 7, and I am listed as one. So you could please feel free to reach out to us. We do provide guidance on measuring P2 outcomes and outputs. And something I just wanted to briefly mention here, it's not on this slide. We did put together a P2EJ mapping tool. This is a facility mapping tool. We actually provided a demo of this tool on 4 of our recent P2 grant webinars. We currently have the webinars up online, and we are working to get the recordings posted as well as a demonstration of how you could use that tool. But in the meantime, we do have a handy user's guide if folks are interested. So you could go to our website and take a look at that user's guide, and that will actually walk you through how to use this P2EJ facility mapping tool. And this is all to address environmental justice. And I think that captures it. I didn't want to take up too much time, so I know I ran through some of those slides very quickly. If you have any questions, I will try to stick around for the question and answer portion of this panel. Thank you so much.
Yes, some folks asked us to go back to some slides, but we're going to keep moving for now. Hopefully we can go back to those. And if we can't do that, just request via email for the slide deck, and you can get that information that way. So thank you. Okay, we have this session is we have co-presenters. Nina Bhattacharya and Havala Schumacher are from the USDA Office of Urban Agriculture. They are on detail in this office. And Nina is currently assisting with the compost and food waste reduction pilot project. She's working with the agreements and interagency collaborations. Her permanent role is Assistant State Conservationist for partnerships and initiatives for the Florida Natural Resources Conservation Service. Havala is also on detail with the USDA, and she's engaged in coordinating grant and cooperative agreement funding opportunities and development of an enhanced urban agricultural toolkit. Her home office is in the NRCS projects branch, where she coordinates with the states and recipients of Conservation Innovation, Wetland Mitigation Banking Program, and voluntary public access habitat incentive program grants. So take it away.
All right, so thank you for this opportunity to present today. Since we're fairly new here, we're going to give you a quick overview to our office and what it does, and then dive right into our funding opportunity this year, different spin on recycling. This is a composting and food waste reduction cooperative agreement opportunity. Going to talk a little bit about who's eligible to apply, how we decide whether your proposal is competitive. I'm going to take a quick look at some of the results from the first 2 years of this program. It's a very new program. Talk a little bit about USDA's approach to food loss and waste in general, and then take you on a quick tour to where to find these funding opportunities. Take it away, Nina.
So a little bit of background about the Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production. We are a fairly new office created by the 2018 Farm Bill to encourage and promote urban, indoor, and other emerging agricultural practices. Now, the Farm Bill language specifically highlights things like community gardens and farms, rooftop farms, outdoor vertical production, green walls, greenhouses, a number of the ponics, hydroponic, aeroponic, and aquaponic farm facilities, and other innovations.
All right, so quick overview of what we offer in this new office. There are 2 funding opportunities, actually. One is the Composting and Food Waste Reduction Cooperative Agreement opportunity, which will be which we'll be talking about today. There is also an Urban Ag and Innovative Production grant that we're happy to talk more about in the Q&A or after this session. Our office is also chartered to establish urban offices in cities across the country that have a number of key indicators that make them suitable or that indicate a strong interest in urban ag. FSA, Farm Service Agency, has stood up urban and suburban county committees in 11 counties with a high concentration of urban and suburban farms. So these are elected committees made up largely of agricultural producers from their local communities. And then pertinent, if you want to join us again and hear us talk more next week, there is a federal advisory committee that's just been stood up and will be meeting for the first time on the 23rd and 24th. This is made up of agricultural producers, representatives from higher education, extension, nonprofits, business and economic development. And these meetings are open to the public. So if you're interested in kind of learning more about what we're doing across USDA to support urban ag, please do come out and join us for that.
So I'm going to dive into the composting and food waste reduction pilot projects a little bit more. As Havala mentioned, we do award these through cooperative agreements, which means that the Office of Urban Ag takes a role in terms of working with the partner and making sure these projects come to fruition. We do anticipate a notice of funding opportunity to be released on Grants.gov later this month or early in April. And later in our presentation, we'll indicate how you can sign up to make sure you see that notice of funding opportunity come through. So the main goal of these pilot projects is to assist local and municipal governments plan and implement activities that serve one or more of the following purposes. So generate compost, improve soil quality, increase rainwater absorption, reduce municipal food waste, divert food waste from landfills, increase access to compost for agricultural producers, reduce reliance on and limit the use of fertilizer, and encourage waste management and permaculture business development.
All right, so our enabling legislation for this program says that we're to award these funds to local units of government. That list, what that means is kind of more expansive than you might think. So that can include a city or township government, a county government, a special district government, a municipal government. Independent school districts also qualify as local units of government, as do Native American tribal governments that are federally recognized, state designated Indian tribes, and other tribal organizations that are not federally recognized Indian tribes. So very broad applicability to many different types of local government.
So once the notice of funding opportunity goes out and partners have applied, the Office of Urban Agriculture takes a look at those proposals and evaluates it based on 4 main criteria. So the first one is, does it meet the purpose and goals of composting and food waste reduction? So that goes back to the slide where I was mentioning whether your project will meet one or more of the following goals, including compost generation, improving soil quality, and so forth. The second criteria that we look at is the quality of the plan. So how well is the project going to reduce food waste, and what is going to be the outcome of it? So we're looking at implementation. You know, how have you developed the implementation plan to get the project done? How are you going to measure it? How are you going to evaluate it? Those are the things that we look at. The third criteria we look at is anticipated or demonstrated economic efficiency. So how well are you using federal money? So we look really closely at the budget. We want to see all parts of that budget and items included. So it's very clear what that money will be going towards, whether it goes towards staff time, equipment, or so forth. And the fourth thing that we look at is partnerships. So many of these projects have come to us not just through the municipal government, but also involve nonprofits, private companies, and so forth. So you just want to make sure that within your proposal, you really identify the partnership involved, who's doing what to create a successful project. And so we just really encourage you all to sign up to receive our notice of funding opportunity when it comes out, because then you can really read through the merit criteria in more detail, and that expands upon these 4 items in a little bit more detail.
All right, so we're at the fun part, which is outcomes. This is a new program funded for the first time in 2020, and our awardees give us performance reports annually, which means we just got our first set of performance reports and are really just starting to get our arms around the good stuff coming in. The other exciting thing is that as a pilot program, we have so far given our awardees pretty wide latitude to tell us what success looks like. So success looks like a bunch of different things depending on what kind of organization is applying and what the needs of their community are. So for example, again, not exhaustive, but chose some that seemed representative. Prince William County's project was very education focused. So they focused on creating staff teacher trainings on composting and food waste reduction, producing an instructional video, bonus points if you want to put that up on YouTube for public consumption, and diverted 22 tons of food waste from the landfill. So for those of you with a pocket calculator, that's a whole lot of pounds of food waste that didn't go to the landfill. County of Douglas had an innovative and slightly different approach than some of the others. While many of our programs focused on composting, County of Douglas focused on gleaning and rescuing agricultural produce from fields that might otherwise have gone wasted or unharvested and distributing it to those in need in the community. City of New York obviously has some logistics challenges with a large population, so they focused on really making food waste collection mobile and established 20 food scrap drop-off sites across the city, collecting over 356,000 pounds of food scraps from around the community. Another big number on composting from County of Henderson. And then excitingly for us, because here at NRCS and here at USDA in general, we tend to kind of be soil nerds. We want to see that food waste is indeed being composted and put right back in the soil. So County of Lake applied compost at 6 demonstration farms. So these were conventional farms and organic farm and community gardens, just to kind of get a sense of what soil quality improvements could be recognized by, again, redelivering these materials back to the soil.
So the composting and food waste reduction pilot project is a part of a larger goal of USDA to address food loss and waste. And we actually have a main point of contact, Jean Busby, who's developed a lot of great resources and partnerships that you can view on our website. So some of the key areas of impact we just want to focus on today is the federal interagency collaboration to reduce food loss and waste. There is an agreement signed between USDA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Food and Drug Administration to better coordinate and communicate on our efforts to reduce food loss and waste. Jean Busby has also been working tirelessly with a number of different businesses and operations to join the Food Loss and Waste 2030 Champions. And so these are businesses that have signed on to reduce food waste in their operation. This includes Walmart, Amazon, Campbell Soup, General Mills, so a lot of those big actors. And finally, there's just a lot of helpful resources, including fact sheets, YouTube videos, that are in different languages that are available on the website. You'll see on this screen, this is just one example of one of the fact sheets that we've developed in coordination with the EPA that's posted. So we just encourage you all to visit that and learn a little bit more.
All right, so this may be the most interesting part for you guys, which is how do we make sure that we don't miss this opportunity for funding? And there are two good ways to do that. The first is if you go to farmers.gov/urban, that is the program page for all things urban at USDA, and it has information available on previous year composting and food waste reduction awards, so you can kind of see what was awarded. But critically, there's also an option to sign up for emailed updates on urban agriculture so that when those funding announcements come out, you get an announcement straight to your email inbox. The second, Sachi did a great job of talking about navigating Grants.gov and some tips and tricks for making sure your proposals are competitive. Would just like to say, yes, absolutely, please pay attention to all of that. There is a connect section on grants.gov if you go to kind of that top tab, or you can link directly by the link that I've put here that will enable you to save a search. So if you put in that keyword urban, look for grants, cooperative agreements, in the case of this opportunity, your funding agency, you can save that. And anytime a search hits, again, you'll get an update to your inbox. So that's 2 ways. And then the third one is, if nothing else, reach out to us by email. We are urbanagriculture@usda.gov, or I think you have Nina and my contact information, and we're happy to talk through this or any of the other opportunities that we have.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you, Nina and Navala. That's a great presentation. Our last presenter is Lori McQuay-Penninger. She's the Executive Director of Grants and Sponsored Programs at Riverside Community College District with over 20 years of grant development and management experience. In 2010, she obtained a $5 million grant for Santa Monica College to help fund the development of a recycling and resource management certificate program for 3 colleges in the Los Angeles area. The grant also included funding to explore the development of a national standard certification board to accredit programs such as the professional certification program offered by the NRC. So I'll hand it over to you, Laurie.
Sorry, I had to find the unmute button. Good morning. Good morning. At least it's still morning on the West Coast. Before I begin, I want to share a bit more about me to set the stage for what I'm going to share. I am a grant writer. I'm not with any of the federal agencies. I work at a community college district in California. I know a little bit about a lot, but I don't really know a lot about anything. Over the course of my career, I've written grants for early childhood education, international studies, study abroad, STEM, ranging anywhere from data science, cybersecurity, and mechanical engineering, foster youth, veterans, pregnant and perinatal teens, and of course, recycling and resource management. I have been able to do this because I work closely with content experts like yourselves who are able to share the who, what, where, when, and why with me, which can be synthesized and packaged into a proposal. You might be wondering how I found myself here in this webinar. I met Gary Liss and the National Recycling Coalition in 2010. Actually, I met Gary through the recycling coordinator at Santa Monica College. She and I were both having lunch in the lunchroom, and we passed. And on her way out, she said, "Oh, someone contacted me about a grant. Would you mind following up?" I said, "Of course not." What I didn't know was that the grant was due in 10 days, would include 3 community colleges in Southern California, cross over 2 Southern California counties, Los Angeles and Orange, involve multiple workforce development boards, several community-based organizations, and the National Recycling Coalition. The story could be a comedy of what not to do when writing a grant, but despite the setting, we were successful in securing $5 million to provide training in recycling and resource management. I'm going to share with you why we were successful and offer some strategies as you prepare yourself for the money that is coming. You may have heard this before. Grants are 90% planning, 10% writing. Maybe it sounds cliche, but I am one of those Pollyanna types that truly believes if we can dream it, we can do it. I've been doing that for 25 years and it's worked so well so far, but it can't be accomplished overnight. One of the challenges I face every day are short deadlines. And federal agencies tend to offer anywhere from 30 to 90 days to write a grant, 30 to 45 days if you're the Department of Education, and it almost always involves a holiday, 60 to 90 days if you're the Department of Labor. Agencies like the National Science Foundation will set due dates a good year in advance, which seems good, ideal perhaps, but it is often hard to plan for as other priorities take precedence. Coupled with the short turnaround time is a lack of planning on the part of the content experts. That's not criticism, it's just the way it is. People often come to the grant team after an announcement has been posted and asked to write a grant, but they haven't done the groundwork necessary to create a proposal. I was once asked after a 30-minute conversation about a multi-pronged, rather complicated project, "Do you have everything you need, Lori, to write the grant?" Believe it or not, a 30-minute conversation with a content expert is generally not enough to write a good proposal. A good grant writer will have no problem turning your ideas into words, but the writing is a very small piece of the pie. The pre-planning, the 90%, is what allows those short turnarounds to happen. And I know today we've been presented with some grant opportunities that will have deadlines in the future. And so maybe you're thinking, oh, it won't be a short turnaround. It's almost always a short turnaround. So step 1 in the process is develop the project. And this is part of the 90%. If you've written a grant before, you will look at this slide and think, but that's a grant. She just said to begin with planning, but she's talking about need, plan, cost, and collaboration. Yes, this is the basic outline of a grant. Throw a few other components in like evaluation and project management, organizational history, you do have the grant. However, most grant writers can't make this up for you. And to be fair, you don't want your grant writer engaged in creative writing. You end up with projects you actually can't implement, or with those comments like, what was she thinking when she put that in here? Grant writers can find data to support the project, research what other institutions are doing, even contact vendors and collaborators for you. But this takes time you may not have before a grant is due. In addition, do you really want the grant writer with a background in art history or underwater basket weaving to contact your waste management partners? That's not to downplay my background, but my background's in writing. I can't necessarily speak to resource management. So what can you do while you are waiting for a competition to open? Here's a few things. Identify your need. This can be an external need or an internal need, because let's be honest, we often pursue grant funding because we need money. Almost always we need money to do something really awesome in the community, but the reason we're pursuing the grant is that we do need the money. In the case of Santa Monica College's grant with the National Recycling Coalition, SMC did not have an internal need. This was not even on our radar. SMC, in fact, this project, we had an interest, a passion, and a commitment to sustainability, but we had not considered resource management as a training program. We had considered solar, we had considered some water resources, but not resource management, recycling specifically. The National Recycling Coalition, though, had considered this as a project. They had communicated with their industry partners. They had expressed the need to train the workforce on recycling and resource management in the context of green economy. Gary and his team had identified the need, outlined the basic activities, and even identified potential partners. Identifying the partners is actually critical, as it takes generally a long time to bring partners into a project. I am currently writing a lot of grants on apprenticeship development in both traditional and non-traditional fields. And we can't pursue these grants without having employer partners. It is taking us 2 to 3 months to develop the employer relationships we need to the point where they will commit to accepting apprentices at their job site. And that's key because they actually have to pay the apprentices. So any grant that has a 30-day turnaround and we haven't started ahead of time with our partners, we won't be able to apply because it's almost impossible to get the employer partners on board that quickly. Nearly all grants you pursue will require some sort of collaboration. There was a time when we could work in a silo, in a vacuum, but not anymore. And this collaboration is true collaboration. It's not just some support. You can't write a generalized letter of support and expect readers, the people critiquing your projects, to say, oh, they have true collaboration. Reaching out to and engaging these partners before the writing begins will help ensure the success of the project. It will also help you identify a match, which, as you've heard, is often required. Reviewers look a little bit more carefully at match than they used to look at match. And so it has to be a real match, not just, oh, we're going to donate 25% of this building, the F&A costs, and that'll be our match. No, it should be a little bit more thoughtful and documented. This outreach with partners can be secured through one-on-one conversations, advisory boards, task force, community coalitions. It doesn't have to be particularly time-consuming. And I think in the case of the Santa Monica College grant, the National Recycling Coalition was already having those conversations through monthly meetings with other participants that were necessary. So if you're building a project that integrates what you're already doing, that's even better because it just flows seamlessly by the time you actually get to an open competition with a due date. The other piece that I want to specifically note is the budget. The budget is the grant in numbers. I write for a living, but I'm actually stronger in math. And so I prefer to develop budgets sometimes because it's like it's an equation, right? You got this plus this is going to include this amazing outcome, almost like a logic model for those of you who have experience with a lot of grant development. I highly recommend to everyone I meet to develop the budget first before ever writing a single word, maybe a work plan, maybe a draft, something that you have to do to get people at a table. But when you sit down to write the grant, have that budget done. If not completely done, mostly done. I actually won't write a grant before I have a budget. If you cannot describe the project in numbers, you will not be able to present the grant in words. Questions that budget development will tell you, do you actually need the money? When I've sat down with multiple teams in many different programs and said, so what are you going to spend the money on? Do you really need $1 million to do what you want to do? Or do you need a $25,000 grant? Can you implement the project with the money available? Are your outcomes in your project timeline so grandiose that you actually need the $1 million, but you only have $100,000? How much do you have to give to your partners? Do you need to collaborate with people? Is it a requirement of the grant? Do you have to share the money? Will that give you enough money? And most importantly, what specifically will the grant fund? We all know the other category, or you just throw, oh, we have $25,000 left, we'll just throw it in the other category. But as you just heard, the federal agencies want to know how exactly you are spending that money. And it's becoming even more critical for them to see the detail and not just, oh, $25,000 in the other category. In most cases, much of this budget development can occur before the grant opens. And between identifying the collaborators and doing the budget, you're going to find that match that you need. So step 2 of the process, assessing organizational capacity. Once you develop the project you hope to fund, assess your organizational capacity to apply. When I first met Gary, he had the need, the plan, and the partners all on board. And more specifically, he had the industry partners, which were required for this particular grant competition, which was the Department of Labor's community-based job training grant. What Gary didn't have was an eligible applicant to apply for the grant. The National Recycling Coalition was unable to apply for the grant in question because it was limited to community colleges. Fortunately, Santa Monica College had the capacity and in fact was well situated to apply and lead, having a very strong commitment to sustainability. Capacity is more than simply being an eligible applicant. I have found, particularly in the past 2 years, as we have struggled with the COVID pandemic, that many departments on our campus or perhaps in your organization simply don't have the time, energy, or commitment to apply for new funding. They are at the community college level, they are dealing with students and faculty who are teaching and learning online, which is a brand new environment. Enrollment is down. People are still getting sick. We have to do contact tracing. There are so many things that we've had to do in the past 2 years to address COVID that say, if the NRC had come to us with let's develop a new program in recycling and resource management, it is likely we wouldn't have had the capacity to say yes, given the current situation. As such, when you consider applying, consider the environment in which you are applying. Also, consider staffing. If you will need staff to implement your project, do the people currently employed have the time to do it? Or will you have to hire? If you have to hire, what does the timeline for doing that look like? At the community college level, it takes 6 to 8 months to hire a person, sometimes even a year before you get a project management manager on board. Can you sustain the project during that time while you're trying to hire? Some of these questions may seem incredibly simple, but these are the areas where I have found that the hiccups occur. If you can't hire staff in a timely manner, can you hire a consultant? Do you have policies around that? If you reassign someone who's going to do the work of the person and reassigned. All of these questions have budget implications, which is why I will say again, do the budget first, think through these number issues. Another thing to consider, have you managed a public grant before, and more specifically a federal grant? If you need $1 million, do you have the financial infrastructure to do this? Have you considered the rules and regulations outlined in the Code of Federal Regulations that apply to your organization with regard to annual audits? Those of you in the public sector and the municipalities probably have, but community-based nonprofits often haven't. Do you understand what your annual audit requirements would be, your reporting requirements, how you would track the funds, how you would account for the funds? Lastly, do you have a grant writer or someone else on your team who can write the grant? If you don't, will you need to contract with someone? If you can loop the writer in as early as possible, they will have the time to do the research necessary to learn at least a little bit about your project before they have to write. Step 3, evaluating the opportunity. Often assessing institutional capacity and evaluating the grant opportunity go hand in hand. Sometimes you get the grant opportunity and then you assess capacity. Sometimes you assess capacity and then you evaluate the opportunity. As Sachi noted, while your organization may have the capacity to apply for most grants, you may find one like Gary did that simply does not allow your organization to apply. That's when you need to find a partner. It's good to have those partners kind of in place beforehand, because Gary got lucky 10 days before the grant was due that he found us. And that was only because Madeline and I passed in the lunchroom. And I didn't really have to go through too many processes or hoops at Santa Monica College to get approval. They trusted me to write grants, and I was able to just say, yeah, let's do this. Other items to consider as you evaluate the opportunity is its appropriateness to the project. I'm sure you've all heard that you shouldn't chase the money, rather you should find money that aligns with your project. You don't want to be developing a project to fit the money. That is never a good recipe, and it doesn't often lead to success. Even if you are successful, you will find challenges in implementing the grant because it really wasn't what you needed. So good questions to ask. Do you really need this money to do what you want to do? Does it let you do what you want to do? Or will you have to compromise critical components? Also important is the timing. Does the timeline of the funding align with the project timeline? Again, back to hiring people, capital construction, many things can lead to timing issues between the grants that are available and the projects that you want to fund. If there are timeline challenges, do you have a plan B? In the case of SMC's partnership with the National Recycling Coalition, we were proposing new training. For-credit curriculum development is a time-consuming process at institutions of higher education. There's a whole curriculum review process that you have to complete in order to get for-credit education approved by the state board and out into the classrooms to students. However, the Department of Labor wanted training provided within a year. So SMC worked with its other community college partners on this project and with the NRC to develop and offer non-credit training that didn't require the lengthy curriculum approval process while the for-credit curriculum was going through review. Fortunately, on SMC's end, we had already developed a model by which new workforce development curriculum would start with non-credit and transition to for-credit. So we were able to integrate this model into the proposal without much thought. If we had not had that experience with other programs, particularly in sustainability with our solar program, it would have taken probably more than 10 days to develop a plan as to how we were going to get curriculum out the door in 6 to 12 months when the curriculum review process was actually 12 months to 18 or 24 months. Lastly, something to consider is sustainability. Most grants require a sustainability plan. And questions you should ask in this regard: does your project need to be sustained, and can you sustain it? If not, have you discussed whether you should be pursuing a project you cannot sustain without external funding? That's a tough question and even tougher conversation. And while I can't speak to much of what you do, I can say from a student perspective, when a college implements a really amazing project that helps students pursue their dreams, and then that project ends just because the funding ends, students lose. It's almost worse than if the project had not existed at all. This is a planning question that you should consider before you ever write the grant, not a, oh, the grant ends in 6 months. What do we do now? Finally, you get to step 4, which is writing the grant. So spend all this time, the 90% planning the grant, and you get to the writing part. If you've considered all the questions posed in the previous slides and find yourself still wanting to pursue a grant funded project, you will have a plan, a budget, concrete outcomes, partners, a project management plan, including who's going to lead the application, organizational structure, and most likely a writer. You will be in a good place to move forward regardless of the funding opportunity timeline. I can tell you that a very short turnaround can be done, can be very, very successful. You can turn grants around in a week. And however, I would be remiss to say that the National Recycling Coalition, Santa Monica College, and its partners at Irvine Valley College and Golden West College developed a successful grant in 7 days. We did not actually develop a successful grant in 7 days. We wrote the grant in 7 days, but the planning and development of that grant was actually 6 months to a year in the making, with the work that each partner had done prior to putting a finger to the keyboard. And so I think with that, I've asked you a lot of questions, and I think we are to the question and answer stage. Wayne?
Thank you, Lori.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm going to put up on the screen here the everybody's emails. If you want to contact them individually. And there they are. This is usually the Q&A session, but it looks like throughout the presentations, all the questions that were posed were answered. So that's we've never done that before. So I guess I'm not needed anymore. But anyway, Lori just finished up, so there might be some questions coming in for that. But while we're waiting for some questions, anybody that presented previously have anything else to say to add to for the group? I guess I'll just mention something. We're a nonprofit organization. We, I believe 2 years ago, we tried to get into the Grants.gov system to apply for a grant. And there's a pretty robust verification process. If you're an organization or a nonprofit or even a municipality, you need to go through a verification process with several government agencies. And we got stuck at some point and we could not figure out what was wrong. And here we eventually found out our incorporation papers were misfiled. And instead of being a subsidiary of Penn State University, we ended up being some corporation in Las Vegas, Nevada. So kind of funny, but it did take almost a year to resolve that. But I guess the point is, make sure when you apply for these through the federal government grant program website that make sure you get verified first, because that can be a sticking point.
Wayne, this is Gary. I just want to underscore when we talked with Timothy Hood, that was something that she underscored, that it may take 3 to 6 months to go through that Grants.gov process. Yep. For those who haven't started down that road yet, now's a great time to start, because this is the beginning of lots of different funding opportunities that are becoming available. In the future, we are planning to do additional webinars on additional grant opportunities as they become available. But this is the beginning of providing that support to our network. And I'd like to thank all the speakers for an amazing group of presentations. In the Q&A, it, I think, became clear that there's a couple of RFAs, requests for applications, on the street available right now with a very short timeline to apply. And if you listened carefully to Lori, now's the time to begin to get organized to figure out what you want to apply for, recognizing that there's a whole lot of money coming down the pike. So again, thanks to all the speakers for a great job on putting all this information out there. The slides will be available after today's presentation. Wayne, could you explain where and how people can find those?
Yeah, the webinar will be recorded. It's been being recorded, and it's going to be edited and made available on the RMC websites and the NRC website. It'll give me a few days to get that edited and get up on our website. So that will be made available. And if you need copies of the slide decks, just email me, and we'll take care of that.
Wayne, someone pointed out in the chat that your email isn't written on the contact information sheet, so I've just been answering individually with it.
That's fine. Thank you. And a couple. Okay, go ahead.
And Wayne, I'd like to thank all the speakers. This was an excellent webinar. Thanks to all the speakers that were on this webinar, and for all of our guests as they're listening in. I'd like to lend the support of Sashi, who's on our NRC guest as an intern for the NRC, as she can be continuing to support you if you email Sashi. She will be researching ongoing in the future up through May for the upcoming grants as they become available, not only what is available now, but in the next few months. So I'm volunteering the services of Sashi here if you email her. And we will be continuing to provide that service for our NRC members as well as those on this webinar. And thank you again to all of the presenters in this webinar.
Yeah. Again, I mentioned that the webinar is going to be recorded or has been recorded, and it will be made available for viewing at a later date. We do this monthly, so next month we're having one scheduled. I think it's sometime mid-April, and we're going to post that very soon. That announcement very soon. So just look to our websites and emails for the schedule updates on our next webinar. So with that, I think we're going to close. So thank you, everybody. This has been our largest cast of presenters, so it went very smoothly for the most part, and everybody had great information, great questions, great answers, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of follow-up here. There's going to be a lot of interest in going for a lot of this money that's going to be available. So have a great day, everybody, and we'll see you next month.